hey, I have a Patreon. Apparently you're supposed to mention it in your videos as well as linking it in the description, so there you go. Today I will be complaining about another great Pokemon in advance, Offensive Suicune. Now, if you've watched my video on the issues I have with Dragon Dance Tyranitar in advance, then the complaints today are going to sound similar. It's a mixture of not having enough EVs, not having enough move slots, and not being able to switch it in as easily as you would expect from a Pokemon with as much natural defensive utility as Suicune. Now, disclaimer, this is just how I tend to see Suicune. Just like the DD-Tar video is how I tend to see DD-Tar. This is not a video where I'm saying my way is correct and everyone else is wrong. There are a lot of great players out there who succeed with these Pokemon all the time, because they play things differently. So, yeah, bear that in mind. So, Offensive Suicune. It is usually known as a more defensive Pokemon, Calm Mind, Rest, impossible to kill because look at its defenses, but it's a great offensive Pokemon too. So, the defining trait is that instead of the reliable Surf, you generally use Hydro Pump. Surf is fine, but Hydro Pump immediately OHKOs a lot of Tars. It forces Snorlax to self-destruct on you rather than taking several Surfs and safely looking for those Body Slam paralyses? Who knows? So you're generally going to want Pump. Killing Metagross after a boost, generally a solid move to throw out, hits Zapdos switch-ins really hard. Now, the last two slots can be a lot of things. Generally, you're going to have Ice Beam, though. That is a very common feature of Offensive Suicune. And we'll get to the non-Ice Beam variants in a bit. But for now, that last move slot. So, a lot of options. Roar is a good one. It's not as effective as when everyone's Blissey they were trying to counter Suicune with was Calm Mind, in which case it was free wins. Those days are long behind us, though. Nowadays, Roar is mostly for winning Calm Mind wars with other Suicune, because turns out Calm Mind Suicune counters Calm Mind Suicune pretty well, or at least forces a stall war. So you'll definitely be beating defensive Roar Suicunes with an offensive one, and can be really dangerous. It's also generally nice for especially offensive teams to be able to phase a resting Snorlax, even if you don't have spikes. Obviously, it is nice with spikes. If you, force out Blissey on the switch, make it take a lot of damage, so it has a harder time switching in later. So, other moves. Those of you familiar with DPP will know Offensive Suicune as just about always running HP Electric. Not so viable in advance. I mean, it's not bad, for sure, because Gyarados is kind of a threat, but generally HP Grass is preferred, and you might be thinking, well, why do you need to smack Swampert so hard? Doesn't Calm Mind and Hydro already really hurt it? Answer is yeah, but sometimes you want to OHKO it, because as we'll see, then Suicune has longevity issues with the offensive set, and you want to be able to not have to eat that Earthquake, or even worse, Toxic. And hitting other waters is nice too. When Starmie's trying to blow through you after a Calm Mind, you don't want to take multiple Thunderbolts. You want to just smack it with that +1 HP Grass. So yeah, if you're okay with Hydroing Swampert, then HP Electric is fine. Gyarados is pretty annoying. A lot of teams rely on Gyarados as the Suicune check, as they are right to. It's a good counter, but so generally HP Grass is chosen over Electric, but yeah. Other moves. So another very common one is Substitute. This is nice because you can set up on Blissey Seismic Tosses and dodge things like Leech Seed and Toxic. Generally really obnoxious. And those are most of them. You can experiment with fringe stuff like Toxic, which is nice for forcing Blissey to switch out, so you launch a +1 or +2 Hydro Pump on something else, and odds are that something else is not going to have to be good at dealing with it. However, I don't consider it too reliable anymore, because another big target was Milotic, and Milotic runs Refresh on every set, so when you didn't used to, so not really that useful. It can still be okay, forces a defensive Suicune to rest. Generally an okay move to have, but it's more fringe. And the Blissey thing can still be big enough to make it work. So, yeah, those are the moves. So, what are the issues? Well, you might notice that, well, it's a mixture of not having the right moves for the right Pokemon and not having the right amount of EVs to make sure you can cover everything. So what I mean by that is if you're running Substitute, which is generally a pretty good measure against Milotic and Blissey stuff, you need max HP, and then either you are struggling with your damage output sometimes, or you're not fast enough. And both of those can be a big deal, because even max special attack Suicune sometimes has power issues. So cutting into it is not fun. And you're going to want to run speed on Suicune. I mean, some people will just run max HP, max special attack, and it's nice, but there's a lot of stuff that's going to be outrunning you naturally. I mean, you don't even outrun offensive Swampert anymore, and you don't really like taking those Earthquakes, because Suicune in Sandstorm dies really quickly. I mean, I'm not saying it switches in and then 2 turns later it's dead, but it can't take repeated hits, and it tends to, since it's not OHKOing that much, then, and it's not that fast against more things it does OHKO, like Salamence, then it's going to be taking lots of hits and it's going to just get beaten down. So it very often becomes a trading machine, and that is kind of my issue with Suicune. Against offense, it's just a kind of trading machine, and against defense, sometimes it struggles to have the right move. I mean, you sub Suicune against Roar Suicune is just useless. And Roar Suicune against Blissey and Milotic is also just useless. So you have those issues. Not to mention, subbing in Sand can, against a Seismic Tossing Blissey, I mean, you might take the Blissey down, but you're also just, again, trading. Which, again, might be alright, but it can be really tough because Suicune is not paired with Magneton that commonly, the offensive sets. And even specially defensive Skarmory can annoy it by whirlwinding it out and making it take more spikes so it gets worn down even quicker than just in Sandstorm, which is already fairly fast. So, yeah, so some people might go, well, what about the Sub-Roar set? Which is, oh, and Substitute sets normally run Surf. So, again, power issues. Although Hydro is viable on the bulkier ones, it'll run Sub or Surf, like Sub-Rest, which we'll get to, but generally you want Hydro because, again, Scarm, but also Protect, and yeah, so some people do like Sub-Roar because it manages to set up on Blissey and deal with Calm Mind Suicune, generally nice. So yeah, this set is viable. It also outphases Skarmory, but again, it's the issue of Sand, and against offense, you're still going to be a trading machine, except even less reliably, because while you have Substitute to block Metagross's Explosion, and that is a very common anti-Suicune tool. It's just, well, it's going to annoy me, but I'm just going to blow up on it, and I'll at least take it down with me. So it helps there, but, you know, with the max HP investment and then the special attack versus speed conundrum, then you're not going to be hitting them as hard, you're not threatening them nearly as hard, you don't have Ice Beam for Zapdos or Celebi, and so this is just awful against Celebi. So, and with Surf and not that much special attack investment, then Snorlax just threatens you all day. So, you can see the issue now, I think. It's a matter of picking your poison, and those poisons all tend to be common and really good. So, it's, and even in a lot of good matchups, then it will just get not that far. Another issue I have, oh, you can also use Sub-Rest so that you stall out things like Blissey and Sand with ease and don't get worn down for hitting sub, which can work, but resting can also be taken advantage of really hard. I mean, since you're also an offensive Suicune, then, you know, even something like Dugtrio can come in on a rest and mess your day up. It's not easy, but, you know, against Suicune, against common defensive teams, Skarm, Bliss, and faster pokes like Gengar and Arrow and Doug, and just finding it hard to switch in safely on much of anything, even something like a T-Tar. However little damage it does, even with a Fire Blast on the switch, that damage is going to stick. And it can get played around. Now, in Suicune's defense, it has some incredible matchups, or if you use it right, if you time it right, it will do a ton of damage. An absolute ton. It'll take out a Zapdos, it'll force down a Snorlax. So a lot of how Suicune can be made more effective, you keep in mind its flaws and you try to capitalize on them somehow. Like, for example, Snorlax is a lot less eager to come in and trade down with Suicune if it's already taken damage. So if you can force that damage on that Snorlax early, then sure, maybe that works. And another thing is that when usually teams with Suicune, they use it as their water type, so they rely on it defensively. And when you're using offensive Suicune, who already has a problem with taking damage from full, and you're just switching it into something as innocuous as a Salaman's Fire Blast, then you're already, losing key percentages. And when you're generally going to be relying on Suicune as a defensive water type, then it will also get worn down, and then suddenly you're going to be struggling against that late game physical attacker. Yeah, it can be frustrating. So again, team support can go a long way here. Teams with offensive Suicune and offensive Swampert, great. No, that can work. That can really work. Suicune can even bust down Zapdos for Swampert to take advantage of, or mow through Celebi, or set up on Milotic that wall Swampert, things like that. So it's very team support heavy. It's very specific in what it can do, and it even it just requires a lot of support and careful play. You have to be very conscientious. It's very difficult to consistently use Suicune and just have it put in work, because naturally the deck tends to be stacked against it somewhat. It's because defensive teams, you don't switch in on common defensive Pokemon, so it's going to take things like careful doubling into Tyranitar switches, because you don't want to be switching into any attack from Tyranitar at all, no matter how weak it is, even Fire Blast. Suddenly that 4% or whatever that you lose, that's a big difference when you're trying to... Suicune often scraps by at just low percentages when blowing through faster revenge-killing Mence and Gengar and whatnot. So, another set I should mention is Substitute and Rain Dance, which is a UD set, and the idea is to clear sand, obviously, which helps it create more subs and lets it get worn down less. Now, this is a good set, for sure. It can really trouble defensive teams, and it can also be part of a rain team. Problem is then Snorlax, and because you just give Snorlax leftovers, and that can be really ugly. So, and you're also still going to struggle with things like Zapdos and Celebi, and it can get pretty nasty. If you're able to remove T-Tar, then the support can be nice. So it means that Suicune will definitely be of more value to its teammates than potentially itself. Kind of like how the offensive set, blowing through Zapdos and whatnot, can potentially help its teammates out more than it itself. So it's more of a trading machine. And so there's that, but my issue with Suicune is I tend to see it as a sweeper, so I guess it might just be a mindset thing on my part, but I do think it has a frustrating inability to not do everything it wants with one set, which can make things annoying depending on the matchup. So it's a matter of team support and really heads-up playing. And you still have to pick the right move for your team, so it's not the easiest thing to do. It's absolutely a great Pokemon, it's just sometimes it frustrates me with its issues, with a bread and butter Hydro, Ice Beam filler set. Just because against offensive teams, even if you have that sub, you're still going to have the EV problems, and you're struggling to come in, and Skarm and Bliss and Gengar and maybe even Doug, God forbid Zapdos, is just going to be worthless. And against offensive teams, you don't come in against something as innocuous as offensive Swampert's Ice Beam, because you're going to get chipped down, and Snorlax and Metagross and Salamence is going to be faster, and God, they even sometimes have Zapdos, and it can just be, not that it's all bad, you just have to play it differently. I don't think Calm Mind to win is the way. I think getting it in on Tyranitar early on and just blasting Hydro against those teams in sand can be nice, because that will leave a mark on Snorlax. Let's go to the damage calc. Offensive Suicune should be a set soon. And Hydro versus Utility Lax that's pretty good. That's 3 at KOing most of the time in Sand. Or at least it's putting it in real danger. But you have to be really aggressive with it. You can't switch it into an attack and then call Mind, because otherwise you'll just thud against Snorlax or just get traded on. And so I think taking advantage of Tyranitar is really nice. So you have to play it aggressively, and you also have to keep in mind that it is not going to be your bulky water. Because, and that is a common defensive, I don't want to say failing, but no other word is coming to mind, when offensive teams with Suicune really rely on it to handle things like DD Ments, but there's no way to really get anywhere with Suicune without letting it take those hits while trading blows with Metagross and Snorlax, or even switching it into Tyranitar or something that doesn't threaten it on paper as much as Swampert. So you have to really be careful. You have to have things like a bulky Gengar to handle Ments, because or like a second water, most likely Swampert, or something, because, you know, bulky Metagross maybe, because otherwise you are going to struggle when DD Ments or DD Tar gets that boost against your Calm Mind Celebi or Jirachi and threatens your entire team. So something to keep in mind. The last set I'll mention is Asta's Modest Crocoon, which is a great set, and the reason it's really nice is because it combines longevity with being a threat while asleep. Now, the spread most commonly used by everyone is max special attack, because you want to be threatening Scarm, and this amount of bulk, you know, speed for Jolly Tar, and you're not Ice Beaming defensive Celebi anyway, so, I mean, give or take a little bit, but most of the time it's going to be this, and it's really good. And yeah, you set up all over Blissey and Milotic, you don't care at all. Scarm, if Scarm switches into if Scarm eats a plus 3 Surf, I think it dies, even max special defense. Or it's close. Yeah, it's a roll to kill from that. So this set is really scary. It does help with a lot of issues, in that you can switch into Swampert without being completely thrown off, and you are still a threat while sleeping. Of course, it does have its issues in that Celebi is gonna not make you happy, and you can't rely on it against Salamence, and you also have to be careful when sleep talking against Pokemon that are going to phase you, because you have to know the advanced sleep talk mechanics. There's a thread in Ruins of Elf, for anyone who doesn't know, who wants to look them up. But yeah, there's that. But this is a great set. So, and if you combine it with another water, like Asta used a ton of Swampert with it, then a lot of its issues will go down. You know, offensive Swampert doesn't do so well against Milotic Blissey stuff, but this Suicune sets up all over them, and Swampert in turn helps against T-Tar and Ments. So that's an example of how, if you are conscientious and heads up and really head in the game regarding building your team and playing with Suicune, then it will succeed. It's just more high maintenance than you would expect from such a high-profile Pokemon. And I think that's pretty much it. So thank you guys for watching. I hope this was informative. If you agree or disagree, let me know. I guess since I'll just finish this off by mentioning other gimmicks, like Mirror Coat on offensive Suicune is viable, I suppose. If you really want to get rid of Zapdos, but I generally don't. It's not going to do anything against the defensive issues, and still probably not most of the offensive issues, i.e. Snorlax and Metagross. You could, in theory, run Protect. I haven't seen it yet, but still not going to do anything against defensive teams, so maybe. But Sub, at least, does things against defensive teams too, so it's probably inferior there. And Reflect, probably not. And you can run a Calm Mind Surfer Hydro Ice Beam Rest, just if you want to sit on Suicune and Milotic that badly, while still having Ice Beam for Celebi and Ments and whatnot. Just be really careful of being forced to rest since you can't make them pay for it in your sleep like the Cune can. So, yeah, I think that's just about it. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope this was useful, and I will catch you next time.